Morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Well, we're to the sermon time again, and it's interesting that following a path of instruction from the Scriptures. Last week I talked about the Ten Commandments, so I had a little booklet with us on that, and I mentioned these. But this week it seems to hit even closer, because the first booklet I've got here is the origin and change of the Sabbath. Well, that's actually my topic today, the Sabbath. That's my sermon title. It's the Sabbath. And I think it's going to be a little shorter sermon if I don't spend too much time in the verses I have. But the change, who did it? Who changed from Saturday to Sunday? And then we have the weekly cycle, because some are concerned that the weekly cycle has been altered time and time and time and time again. But the thing is, they never changed the routine, the numbers, like the first day, the second day, the third day, fourth day, fifth day, sixth day, seventh day. They never threw in an extra day with no name. So we're okay. And then I usually tell people, the Orthodox Jews, they would not forget their day. So we know the cycle is right. We know that the Saturday is the Sabbath. And then we have the first day in the Scriptures. There is a number of times that the first day is mentioned in the Scripture, and we should find out why and where it's stated and what was done on those days. So not to be afraid of that topic. Anyway, that's some booklets that are available for us. And I want to read to you something from 20 years ago or 21 years ago. I want to read you this statement. If you were there in church, you might remember this. I doubt it. But okay, 20 years ago, this statement is used. I could use it for a conclusion or use it to begin with, and I think I'm going to use it as a beginning. The Church of God Seventh Day observes the seventh day of each week as the Sabbath. Sometimes we wonder why we even call it Saturday. But when we're talking with the regular folks, they don't understand Sabbath, so we have to use the weekly, call it Saturday, so that they know which day we're talking about. But even the Sabbath is a little different, isn't it? I'll get into that. Where we start the Sabbath and where we end the Sabbath, they really don't understand that. Okay, we'll find it in the Scriptures in a moment. Every Saturday we lay aside the work of the week and take a rest. Amen. Pretty fair idea. 1 and 7, we get a rest. More than just a physical recess, the Sabbath is prime time for renewing our faith in God and our love for His people. It is the happiest day of the week. Amen. It should be. Okay, that should be the blessed day, the happiest day of the week. One more statement here or so. The Sabbath is supported by 3 sure witnesses. Creation. I talked about that last week too, but creation, we'll mention it a little bit today. The Decalogue, or the Ten Commandments. Talked about that last week. That was the main topic. And the New Testament. The Sabbath is supported in the New Testament. Jesus kept the Sabbath perfectly through attendance in the synagogue, through works of mercy, and by reciting it from the traditional, rescuing it from the traditional impositions of the Pharisees. The Pharisees tried to be so accurate. You know, it's admirable to be a perfectionist, but there's a point where it comes to an end. They tried to take so good care of the Sabbath that they made all kinds of rules. How many steps you could take, you know, what was considered work, or you could do this but not that, because then you've gone too far. You know, they tried to make too many rules. And then Jesus said, no, you know, why do you do that? Why do you make so much trouble out of it? Why not enjoy it? Don't make things work. But the Pharisees said, well, you ought not to carry anything on the Sabbath day. A few of us walked in with briefcases and instruments, and when does it become work? We don't need to know that, right? We know what's right and wrong. When the garbage collecting didn't come to happen, I didn't carry out the garbage bin on Sabbath morning either, because that was their alternate day to come around and pick up the garbage. Mine could wait another week or two, and I did. I don't have to do that, but I bring my briefcase. We need wisdom. We need some smarts that God gave us. What is working, what's not. You have to feed your animals? Of course. Do you give them water? Of course. Did you carry 2 buckets at one time? Probably. You know, that's what Jesus pointed out, that the Pharisees had gone too far in trying to make some stretch of a rule as to when it becomes work and when it's not. Just use the Bible as it is and you'll be just fine. Okay, so Jesus gave us an example of teaching and regards were not forgotten by his apostles. When Jesus taught and then his apostles went on and carried it on, the same thoughts about the Sabbath were not forgotten. In the book of Acts, there's 90 Sabbaths were observed. Wow. Ah, interesting. Hunt those up. 90 Sabbaths in the book of Acts. Of course, Paul stayed in one place, what was it, 18 months? Alrighty, so in looking at the Sabbath day, the 4th commandment of the Decalogue enjoins the people of God to observe the Sabbath, the 7th day of the week, commonly called Saturday. It is to be regarded as holy from sunset Friday until sunset Saturday. It was given as a memorial of creation, and it is to be used for worship and rest. Consistent with this, secular work is to be excluded on the Sabbath. Okay. Now, I right away started thinking about, I need to bring something to show and tell. You know me, always like show and tell. I'll try not to show the cars on the front page or the cars on this page. I mean, what we're after is a calendar big enough to be seen from a distance is what I was after. And I picked a month that had, started with 1, so Sunday is number 1, Monday is, Sunday number 1, Monday number 2, Tuesday 3, Wednesday 4, Thursday 5, Friday 6, and Saturday 7. Well, that's how God laid it out to start with. He just called it day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, and then the 7th day he called the Sabbath. Somebody else came along with these other names, and it stuck. They like to use those names, that's all right. But we can look at this across here and say, that's our calendar for 2016. We're still doing the same thing. We still have the same order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Nobody made an 8-day week. Actually, somebody tried, and it doesn't work. Yeah, we get very, very tired. You cannot work extra days and have a rest, and then extra days and have a rest. It really does not work. So God's 7 was perfect. It's made right. Okay. So, in doing that, I wanted to talk some about these topics. I wanted to begin in Genesis and kind of work my way through some of these topics. So turn with me to Genesis chapter 2. It's always good to reread these every so often and let your mind think deep into it, because sometimes we just rush through and we say, okay, I got the idea, and that's fine. But sometimes we need to stop and really take it slowly. So Genesis chapter 2, and I'm going to start with verse 1. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. God had finished all of his work. On the 7th day, God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the 7th day from all his work which he had made. In verse 3, and God blessed the 7th day and sanctified it, because in it he had rested from all his work which God created and made. It's Genesis chapter 2, 1 through 3. it included in verse 2 one extra day. 6 he was finished. But he included the 7th because that is a complete amount, and he wanted to include the rest as this package. So these are your work days, and this one you need as well in the package. The 7th day is the day of rest. And he rested to show us an example. I don't know if God gets tired. Okay. Supposedly not. But he did. He gave us an example. He showed us how to do it. Then in verse 3 it says he blessed the 7th day and sanctified it. Sometimes I hear people say, oh, it doesn't matter, any day, 1 and 7 is fine, or every day is alike, we serve God every day. They try to excuse the idea of the Sabbath. Well, here it says that this day was blessed, in verse 3, it blessed and sanctified. Okay, find me the verse where it says that that was removed. Oh, there isn't such a day. There isn't such a verse that says God reversed this blessing or took away the sanctifying. Once sanctified, it's sanctified. If you want to do something else on some other day of the week, that's up to you, but this day is blessed and sanctified. Okay, then we go down to, I scanned down a little further. Where did I go? Down to, because it's mentioned again, he blessed the Sabbath day and sanctified it. And maybe I made myself a note here, verse 3. No, I guess it's in another place where I'm thinking of it. But it names it again that it was blessed. I think that'll come in another place because it was close. It wasn't too far away where he blessed and sanctified it. Yeah, it's probably in another place. I should have had that marked in here. Sometimes I write them right in my Bible to cross-reference to another place where it uses the word blessed or sanctified or made holy. So we'll find that in another place. Let's go to where the Ten Commandments were given in Exodus 20. Exodus chapter 20. Well, I had the word hallowed written here too. Now, that is going to make me nervous, as you can tell. But I had the word hallowed written in here as well. And now I can't land on it, and I've even put little green marks in some places where I wanted to catch words. But I should have put the verse beside it. Okay, so Exodus chapter 20. Exodus chapter 20. This is where the hallowed comes on. Okay. So the Exodus 20 is when God is giving the Ten Commandments, verbally spoken to him. Last week I said we got the verbal audio copy and then we got the hard copy. But he wrote in stone with his fingers, okay? We got the hard copy. Okay, so in chapter 20, Exodus chapter 20, we would go down to verse 8. It says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. You would think thou shalt not should be here. It's not. It says to remember. This is something that we want to do. We want to honor God, to keep this going, keep this connection with the Heavenly Father, to honor the Sabbath day. Then in verse 9 it says, 6 days shalt thou labor. You better labor or you're breaking God's law. Right? Good thought, right? That maybe we need to be active people that work and do labor, do something good. We have too many people standing around looking for a handout, and maybe they ought to read this verse. That 6 days thou shalt labor and do thy work. But the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God, and in it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, thy maidservant, nor the cattle, nor the stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that in them is, and rested the 7th day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. There's the hallowed that I was looking for. Okay, so it's blessed, it's sanctified, and it's hallowed. This day. the Sabbath day, the seventh day of the week. That is obvious from these things. And we need to teach it in our homes so that our sons and daughters do this, but also our manservant and maidservants, and they may not have been part of the children of Israel. They often had other nations that they could invite in. There's a custom now with the Hebrew people that they don't turn anything on Sabbath. If you want the lights on, you have to call a Gentile in to turn the light switch on, because that would be considered work to walk over and go. You can't turn the dial on your furnace morning and night, because that's work. So you have to call a Gentile to come in and turn your dial on your furnace. I mean, there's radical things, really strange things, that are their customs, their traditions. And this says, your manservant and your maidservant should do the same, should keep it holy. Keep it, if they're in your house, on your land. And your cattle, all of your animals, don't work, shouldn't work. Nor the stranger. This word stranger is used for slaves. It said, you were a stranger in Egypt. You were a slave over there. You were not of the Egyptian culture. And if they come to your home, or you have them come and work, or if they're a slave, because they did have people that didn't leave the country when they moved into the promised land, and they used them for wood carriers and water carriers and so on. They had them for servants. And he said, even the stranger that is within thy gates, you can't have a Gentile come in on your property, because they're supposed to keep the Sabbath like you do. So don't invite them in, don't ask them in. Figure out that you can throw the switch like that. Nowadays you can even say, turn on, and the light turns on. Wait, and the light turns on. Okay, how much work was that? Okay. So there is ways around doing what God says. And we need to honor this. It's easy to honor God's law. And this is good for us. This keeps us out of a whole lot of trouble. You read those 10 Commandments, and it'll keep you out of trouble. Okay? So they're a blessing to keep the Sabbath day, and he did bless it and hallow that day. So going on from there, we need to go to Luke chapter 4. Luke chapter 4. Luke chapter 4. Here we go. And I want verse 16. We often say we need to walk in the steps of Jesus and do what Jesus does. Well, let's see what he does. Luke chapter 4, verse 16. And he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. And as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up for to read. He was active in the meeting. He stood up and read the scriptures to them. But he went on the Sabbath day. I've heard the lamest excuses for people not going to church on Sabbath. And one was that God said the animals are supposed to rest. Well, my car needs to rest too. So I can't go to church because it's Sabbath day. I mean, come on. But somebody actually said that to me. That is the strangest thing. Does an automobile know what rest is? I don't think so. Use wisdom again is what I'm getting at, I guess. But here we see that Jesus had the custom. He wanted to go to church. We used to always look in the Psalms and say, I was glad when they said unto me, let's go up to the house of the Lord. He said, I would like to dwell in the house of the Lord forever, because there was joy there, there was comfort, there was peace, there was a pleasure to go to church. So this was Jesus' custom, that he went to church on the Sabbath day, something good to do on the Sabbath. Matthew chapter 28. Now this chapter has got a dual meaning, but I want you to get both. Let's see, Matthew 28. I want you to get the double thought out of this. Sometimes when you're reading along and the Holy Spirit will just fill your mind with a really good idea out of a simple verse. And the more times you read the Bible, the more that happens. Now, reading can be, well, reading is one avenue of getting into your brain and to understand it. You see and you sound it out, you know, you walk through. But all of those very difficult words, that doesn't become too much of a pleasure. So I do enjoy following along in the Bible while the CD is playing. And the guy on the CD, he can say all those words. Doesn't have a problem with it at all. So, and I like Alexander Scorby that used to read to the blind. But I listened to one recently that was very good as well. And he used his voice up and down and things. It was a pleasure to listen to. And here in, well, what I was getting at is every time you go through the Bible like that, you'll find something new. That's the Holy Spirit doing that. So here we are at a very simple verse in Matthew 28, verse 1. In the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn towards the first day of the week, came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to see the sepulchre. A number of things are happening here. Which day is before the first day? I never thought of that before. The seventh day. Wow. You know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The day before the first day of the week was the Sabbath. Well, in the end of the Sabbath, when does the Sabbath end? Well, nowadays people think it stops in the middle of the night, right? When you can't tell. If you don't have a wristwatch, and they didn't have a wristwatch in those days. They didn't have a wristwatch. They didn't have any kind of clock. They were best off if they had a candle with marks on it, how long it would burn for this section of the night and that section of the night, so you could change guards or change something, you know, that had to be done. That was as close as they could get. But this, in their time frame, was when the sun was going down. When's the dawning of the next day or the beginning of the next day? At sundown. In places you read, it's between the two days is called the evenings, between the two evenings. Because when the sun is going down, it's getting darker and darker, and you say, okay, evening is here, we need to finish up, we need to end this, we need to do the so-and-so to get into the house or whatever. And then when the sun's really down, it's still twilight. So that's why you can say between the two evenings. Okay, that's one way of putting it. Anyway, here the dawning was the next day was going to begin. Well, when did it begin? At sundown. Because night was first and then day. When God was creating, in Genesis 1, he said the evening and the morning were the first day. The evening first and then the day. When he started creation, what was first? Was light there already? No. Darkness was first. And then God created light. So night comes first, through the whole Bible. So the evening and the morning were the first day. That means night was first, and then day. So you have your full darkness first, and then your full daylight second. The evening and morning. That's a pretty easy way to do, keeping the months going, the calendars going. When you see the new moon, the little moon is right close to the horizon, but you can still see him. And then he goes down, and you say, oh, this is the first day of the month. No problem. And it's a Sabbath for the people in the Bible times, the Old Testament times. That was a Sabbath. The first day of the month was a Sabbath. Not the weekly Sabbath, but it was a Sabbath. Okay, so going back here to this chapter 28, thinking of it as a day beforehand is an idea of thinking of it. While we're here, a number of things happened. The ladies were coming as the sun was going down, not sun rising here, okay? The sun was going down Saturday afternoon. That's what it says there, in the end of the Sabbath. If you tried to make a leap, you'd have 12 hours missing in those days. Then the angels talked to them, and you go on down to verse 5, and he says, we know that you're seeking Jesus. And verse 6, he is not here, for he is risen. Saturday afternoon when the sun was setting. Right? Right. Okay. Not Sunday morning. The sun was rising here. Then it goes on to say that he had risen from the dead in verse 7, and you go down further, and he said, run and tell the disciples. Well, they didn't have electric streetlights. How are you going to run? This was yet before the sun set, so that they had enough light so that they could do this running. Or right at sundown, when you still had the twilight, so that they could see where they were going. You sure wouldn't run after dark. They were not in Sunday yet. They were still in Sabbath. And Jesus had raised from the grave, had come from the grave, Saturday afternoon, close to sundown. When did they put him in the grave? They had to hurry to get him in the grave because the high day was coming. Had to rush to get him in the grave before sundown. And then he was going to be 3 days and 3 nights in the earth? 3 days and 3 nights? Well, that's then when the sun is setting, he would come out. That's his 72 hours are finished. Okay, those connections are pretty neat to set and to follow up on them. Okay, since I mentioned this already, but in Leviticus 23:32, it says that the Sabbaths should be observed from even to even. And I mentioned Genesis as well, Genesis 1 verse 5, the darkness was first, then the daylight. Maybe in Leviticus 23:32 would be good to just see that even and even. Leviticus. (23:32). It says, "And it shall be unto you a Sabbath of rest, and ye shall afflict your souls." That just means stop everything else, do what's right, and so on. And souls rather than your muscles. Maybe your mind needs a rest, and you need to at the 9th day of the month, at even from even, or at even from even unto even, shall ye celebrate your Sabbath. This is talking about one of the feast day Sabbaths. So they had the first day of the month was a Sabbath, the feast days were Sabbath, and the weekly Sabbath was a Sabbath. The 7th day was a Sabbath. But how did you keep these Sabbaths? From even to even. It starts when the evening is arrived, and the sun is setting, and you keep it until the next evening when the sun is setting. Evening to evening, sunset to sunset. Okay, then let's go to Mark chapter 2. Mark chapter 2. Chapter 2, 27 and 28. What did Jesus have to say? This is red letters. "And he said unto them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath." So when God was creating, he didn't figure it out the other way around. He said, hey, they need a rest. I'll make a rest for man. It's a good thing. I'll make a rest for him. So the Sabbath is for man, for a blessing. Therefore the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Some people want to say that Jesus is the Lord of Sunday because he rose on Sunday morning, but we're already showing that that mathematics doesn't work. Okay, it's not true. And this verse says that Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. The Sabbath day. That's the Lord's day. In John, when it says, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, what day was he on? It's on Sabbath. Okay, that was the blessing that would be there for the Sabbath day. Okay, I'm going to go fairly quickly here. In Matthew 24, and verse 14 through 20, I won't read all of that maybe. Let's see, how can we do this? Okay, the gospel was going to be preached to all the world for a witness to all nations. It's in verse 14. Verse 15, it talks about Daniel, and then it begins to talk about fleeing to the mountains. This was actually through history, you look back at this and you say this prophecy was really about 70 AD when the city of Jerusalem was smashed. And so he's talking about the fleeing from Jerusalem to the mountains. Let him that's in the housetop not come down, just get out of town. And then verse 18, Don't return back to take something else. Don't take your clothing. Just get out of town because danger is coming. Problems are coming. Woe unto them that are with child, and they that are sucking in those days. The little ones, the woman that was pregnant and couldn't hurry. He said, woe unto you, this is a problem. You've got to think ahead on some of these things or try to plan ahead how you're going to travel. But 20 is the key verse here. But pray that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. This is a prophecy reaching forward. After Jesus was dead and gone and raised and gone to heaven. And then this time goes by, and they're still keeping the Sabbath. Still be concerned that you keep the Sabbath day holy. So pray that you won't have to flee on the Sabbath day after his death, resurrection. So pray for those things, for the Sabbath was still important to them. Okay, after Christ's ascension there, then I want to go to Acts 13. Acts 13 and verse 14. They departed from the one city and went to the other, and went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and sat down and so on to read the law and the prophets and so on. The Sabbath is still being kept here in Acts chapter 13 and verse 42. Verse 42. The Jews were gone out of the synagogue. The Gentiles besought these words might be preached to them the next Sunday. Next Sabbath. They were Gentiles. They were not Hebrews. They were of the Greeks and Romans and so on. And they said, I still want to hear it, but I want to hear it on the next Sabbath, because that's the Sabbath day, the worshiping day, the good day that God blessed and sanctified. So then the congregation separated there, and verse 44, the next Sabbath came almost the whole city together to hear the word of God. So they were preaching and teaching on the Sabbath day there long after Jesus died and rose from the grave, ascended to heaven, and Paul was converted, and Paul went out preaching missionary work, and here he is teaching on the Sabbath day still. And the people, the non-Hebrew people, some people say, oh, the Sabbath is the Jews' day. We're not Jews, so no, this was for everybody. This was the Gentile people that were here, regular city folk that were there, that were keeping the Sabbath day. Okay, then I'd want to go to Acts 16, which is right nearby here, a couple of pages away. Acts 16 and verse 13. This is again in the New Testament times of Paul's travels and so on, where he was going from here to there. In verse 13 it says, and on the Sabbath day we, that's Paul writing this, or Paul doing this, and Luke writing it. Luke was the guy that's we, he was the writer of it. And we is all over this. I love this. Just look back through this chapter. I've got they, and then all of a sudden us. They were over there doing that, and then I, Paul, have joined them. Then it's us, right? Luke joined Paul and the others. So then it turns to us, because Luke was there. Luke was doing the writing. So that's in verse 10 when us is said. And then in verse 11 is we. And in verse 12 is we. And in 13, on the Sabbath, we went out of the city by the riverside, where prayer was wont to be made, and we sat down and spake unto the women which resorted thither. The women were there praying, a prayer meeting, and doing something special on what day of the week? The Sabbath. They'd gone out there. Okay, so they were by the riverside holding their prayer meeting. Okay, then Acts chapter 18. Acts chapter 18, verse 4. And he reasoned in the synagogues every Sabbath and persuaded the Jews and the Greeks. It's not the Hebrews' day, the Greeks' day, the Catholics. any day, any church or whatever, it was what kind of a day? It's God's day, the Sabbath. God's day, the Sabbath, for the Jews and for the Greeks. And they met there and persuaded them every Sabbath. Still doing it. Verse 11, and he continued there, he stayed with these people a year and 6 months, 18 months, teaching the word of God among them. And he forgot to tell them that it changed to Sunday. It didn't change. He was still preaching on the Sabbath day. He was still doing the regular things. There's nothing in the New Testament that says that it's changed to another day of the week. So let's go to Isaiah. This is my closing remarks here, and I'm about run out of time too. So Isaiah chapter 56. 56. Oops, I'm turning pages here too fast. 56 verse 2. Blessed is the man that doeth this, and the Son of Man that layeth hold on it, that keepeth the Sabbath from polluting it, and keepeth his hand from doing evil, from any evil. We're blessed if we keep the Sabbath day. Don't pollute it with all kinds of problems and situations. You know, you don't even have to write lists of what you're going to do the next day and the next day and the next day. Just don't do it. Don't pollute the Sabbath day. Have it as a rest. Keep it for yourself, for a blessing between you and God, greeting other people and being with other people. My minister, when I was young, he said, why don't you go out and get your mail in? Do you have to do that? It's just going to make you upset. You get bills and you get commercials, and it's just going to make you upset. Do you have to get it? Well, nowadays you have to fetch it in or somebody will steal it. Yeah. But you don't have to open it and look at the bill and say, how did they charge me that much? You're polluting your Sabbath. That should be a blessing to you. Just that can hold till the sun goes down at least. That can hold for a day. So it'll be a blessing to us if we keep it. And keep our hand from doing evil on the Sabbath day. Amen. Okay, and then also chapter 58, in this Isaiah 58, and verse 13 and 14. If thou turn away thy foot from the Sabbath, from doing thy pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy of the Lord honorable, and thou shalt honor him, not doing thine own ways, nor finding thine own pleasure, nor speaking thine own words. Wow. Now, if you want a commandment that you feel like you have to keep, here it is. It's got a bunch of verses, a bunch of statements of what you shouldn't do. Why? Because it's going to be easier for you to keep the Sabbath. It's going to be more of a delight to you to not disturb your Sabbath and uproot things and cause problems. You're just going to be happier on the Sabbath day. It should be a delight to us. It's a holy of the Lord day. And we need to treat it that way and keep ourselves from all other things. And then in verse 14, then thou shalt delight thyself in the Lord, and I will cause thee to ride upon the high places of the earth, and to feed thee with the heritage of Jacob thy father, for the mouth of the Lord hath spoken it. It's true in the Old Testament, it's true in the New Testament. We serve the Lord, there's blessings that are going to come our way. God said our storehouse will be full. We'll be eating the old stuff, and the new stuff is already arriving. A dilemma, you know, a good one. That God will give blessings for us if we'll do his will and do his ways. And then we will ride on the high places. Well, I'm not worried so much about that. I'm worried about just the good times with the Lord. May God bless you.